Once upon a time, there were two brothers, and these two brothers were called Raven Boy and Little Hawk, and they were part of a tribe who was nomadic, and they used to travel to follow the hunting and sometimes to escape from the weather, sometimes to follow the weather. And at this time, their camp was made on a great beach, and that beach was at the foot of the cliffs, and on the top of the cliffs there were hundreds and thousands of ravens, all going brock, 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 all day long. Now, Raven Boy was about 18 years old at the beginning of our story, and Little Hawk was about 7, and they were orphans. Their parents had died when Little Hawk was just a baby. He didn't remember his father and mother at all, but Raven Boy remembered them. And before they had died, he had made them a promise that he would always look after his little brother. And he tried to do that absolutely to the best of his ability. And so every day he would go out in his dugout canoe, and he would catch fish, which was what all the tribe did, and he would always make sure that he caught enough for that day, enough for the next day in case there was something wrong and he couldn't go out, some to dry and put away for the winter, but always, no matter how much fish he caught or didn't catch, he would always give some to the ravens. And the ravens loved him. Brock, brock, brock. And that was how he came to have his name, Raven Boy. And the Raven Boy wasn't really very popular in the tribe. The tribe were not a very kindly people, and he was a very serious young man because he was always trying to fulfill the promise he'd made to his parents, and so he worked very hard. He never allowed himself any time to play or mess about with the other young men, and they thought he was stuck up. He wasn't stuck up, he was just worried. But Little Hawk was another kettle of fish altogether. Everyone loved Little Hawk. He was very funny. He never had a care in the world. He was full of jokes and songs and stories. He was a very good storyteller. No one knew where he got his stories from. He used to say that he found them in the bushes and brought them out, untangled them and told them on, and no one knew whether to believe him or not, but certainly had a great store of them. And at the time when our story begins, it was just coming up to October. Now, the other men of the tribe were quite lazy, and sometimes if it was a lovely sunny day, they'd rather sit on the beach and play their drums and smoke their pipes than go out to sea and fish as they should have been doing. And if it was a wet day, they'd rather sit in their cedar board houses and play their drums and smoke their pipes than go fishing. And so it was that October, when the storms came in early from the coast, they caught everyone on the hop. The waves were high, the seas were rough. Nobody could get their little dugout canoes far enough out to be able to fish. People were getting hungry. And one day the chief called everyone together and he said, "Right, you lot," he said, "we can't get out to fish. We're all going hungry. If anyone's got anything put away for the winter, they must bring it out now and let me ration it amongst the whole tribe." Well, all the men began to look at each other sideways because they knew they hadn't got anything put away for the winter. They just hadn't started early enough. They'd got nothing saved. The only person who had was Raven Boy. Now, in Raven Boy's cedar board house, he had 12 big baskets of dried fish, carefully gathered and smoked and dried and garnered for himself and his little brother to see them through the winter. He didn't want to give it away to the rest of the tribe, who'd done nothing to earn it. But at the same time, he knew that the other men knew he had it. He didn't know what to do. He kept looking round, hoping that someone would come forward, but no one did. And in the end, sadly and reluctantly, poor Raven Boy, he went into his house and he dragged out the 12 baskets of fish and handed them over to the chief. And the chief said, "Now then, everyone," he said, "I want you to queue up outside my house, hold out your hand, and I will give you exactly enough fish for your needs tonight, and we shall do the same again tomorrow." So everyone began to line up, and each person put out their hand, and the chief would put some fish into it. Little Hawk came up, he put out his hand, the chief put some fish into it. But when Raven Boy held out his hand, the chief gave him a nasty look and he said, "You fed the ravens in times of plenty. You're not having any of this fish. Let the ravens feed you now." And poor Raven Boy, it was so unfair. It was his fish. He opened his mouth to say something, but Little Hawk pulled at his sleeve. He said, "No," he said, "come away. You know what he's like. There'll only be trouble. I'll share mine with you. Don't worry." But Raven Boy said it won't be enough. And he was right, it wasn't enough. They went to bed very hungry that night. And the next day, when they had to queue up, Raven Boy took all his courage in both hands. And when it was his turn, he held out his hand to the chief. And he said, "Please," he said, "you must give me some fish. It's my fish. I caught it all. No one would have any fish if it wasn't for me." "Oh, I must I?" said the chief, and he looked at poor Raven Boy as though he was a bit of something nasty stuck to the bottom of his moccasin. And he said, "Hold out your hand." And Raven Boy held out his hand, but instead of putting any fish into it, that old chief fetched Raven Boy such a clout around his head that he knocked him to the floor. And poor Raven Boy, he hit his lip on a stone and he cut it. And he lay there. He could feel the tears coming. He didn't know what to do. And he looked around to see if anyone would help him, but all the men were looking the other way. And it was Little Hawk that helped him up and helped him back to their house. But by the next day, there was no fish left at all. 12 baskets of fish would have seen Raven Boy and his little brother nicely through the winter, but it couldn't feed a whole tribe, not for more than a couple of days, and now there was nothing left. And the chief called everyone together again, and he said, "Right, you lot," he said, we've got nothing left to eat, we can't get out to fish, we must all take our houses down, pack them into our canoes, and hugging the coast, we shall make our way around the coastline to a creek that I know of about 5 miles from here. Perhaps we shall have better fishing there." And so everyone began to take their houses down. And Raven Boy, because he was always quick and clever, he very soon got his house unlaced, he got all the boards and his bits and pieces packed into his dugout canoe, and he began to help the old people and the women with children to pack up their canoes and unload their houses. And very soon, in the space of a couple of hours, you never would have known there had ever been a tribe on that beach. There was nothing left. It was all packed neatly in the canoes, waiting for the chief to give the order to leave. And Little Hawk, Raven Boy, he was looking around all the time for Little Hawk. He hadn't seen him all the morning. He thought, "Little Hawk never helped me at all. That's not like him. He's not usually lazy." And then he thought, "Oh, well, he must be in one of the other canoes." And so Raven Boy was just about to step into his canoe when the chief called, "Oi, you there, Raven Boy, what do you think you're doing?" And Raven Boy said, I'm getting into my canoe." And the chief said, "You're not coming with us. In times of plenty you fed the ravens. Let the ravens feed you now." And Raven Boy said, "But it's my canoe, it's got my house in it, I'm part of the tribe, you must let me come." The chief didn't answer. He just picked up a stone from the beach and he threw it at Raven Boy. And it hit poor Raven Boy a glancing blow on the side of his head. And Raven Boy was horrified, and again he looked round to see if anyone would stand up for him. But to his horror, the other men, they were picking up stones and they were throwing them at him. And he stood there and he felt so hated and so bullied. He didn't know what to do. But just at that moment, something happened. Out from the chief's canoe stepped the chief's youngest daughter. And she didn't look at Raven Boy, but she went up to her father, the chief, and she said, "I can't go yet. I've lost my lucky bracelet." And the chief said, "Oh, for goodness sake," he said, "leave it where it is. We'll make you a new one when we get to the creek that we're going to." "No," said the chief's youngest daughter, "I'm not going without my lucky bracelet. If I go without my lucky bracelet, goodness knows what may happen. Our luck may run out, our canoes may sink, there may be no food where we're going. I have to have it." And she began to run up the beach. As she did so, she ran very close to Raven Boy. She never looked at him, but as she passed him, she whispered out of the side of her mouth, "When we are gone, go to the place where my sisters and I grind the corn. Go to the place where my sisters and I grind the corn." And then she ran past him and up the beach. She stooped down, she lifted something up, and she said, "Look, I found it." But Raven Boy could see she'd had it up her sleeve all the time. She never looked at him again. She ran back to the boat, she jumped into it, the chief gave the order, and they all went paddling off along the edge of the shoreline. And poor Raven Boy stood there with tears running down his cheeks and mingling with the rain. He was so unhappy and so lonely, and he longed for some company. But when they'd all gone and the last canoe was completely out of sight, he thought about what the chief's youngest daughter had said. And the place where they used to grind the corn was a big semicircle of stones higher up the beach, tall stones, almost in a horseshoe shape, very close together. And if you'd had some roof boards, you could have put them over the top of the stones and you could have made a nice hut. But of course poor Raven Boy had nothing. But he went up to the stones and there was an opening in them, just like in a horseshoe, and he went through the opening, and inside, at first he couldn't see anything at all, but then he noticed the prints of bare feet in the sand, and he took a stick and he began to dig. And very soon he uncovered a big flat stone, and he used the stick to lever up the stone, and underneath someone had dug a very big hole. and in that hole there was a basket. Now that tribe knew how to weave baskets so cleverly and with such tight weave that you could put water in them without it falling out through the weave. You could even heat up that water on a fire to cook with, and this was one such basket, but a very big one. And inside it there were roof boards, there were blankets, there were wooden spoons, there was some dried seal meat, a little bit of dried fish, there was even a clamshell in 2 halves. And when Raven Boy picked it up, it was hot. He opened out the halves, and inside there were burning embers. The chief's youngest daughter had left him everything he needed in order to survive, and his heart filled with love for the chief's youngest daughter. But he was very lonely. He longed for his little brother. He put the house boards across the top of the standing stones and weighted them down with more stones to make a hut. He took some of his blankets and he unrolled them. He got some fresh water in the basket from a spring, made a little fire with the burning embers, put some of the seal meat and the fish inside it to rehydrate and boil, and very soon there was a fine stew bubbling. And just when it was almost ready to cook, someone leapt up from behind the rocks. Surprise! It was Little Hawk. And Raven Boy said, "Oh, Little Hawk, where have you been?" And Little Hawk said, "I've been hiding. I knew what they were planning. And look, I've got more blankets." And it was true, he had. Well, Raven Boy was so happy. He hugged his little brother, and they sat down to eat the stew that he'd made. But he said to Raven Boy said to Little Hawk, "I don't think that we should eat all this now, because I don't know how we're going to hunt. I don't know what we'll live on. We've got no canoe." But Little Hawk said, "No," he said, "let's have full bellies tonight. We'll worry about tomorrow when it comes." So they ate up all the stew and they drank the juices, and then they wrapped themselves in their sleeping blankets and they lay down to sleep. And Little Hawk was very soon fast asleep and snoring. But Raven Boy was so worried. He couldn't get to sleep. He worried about everything. He worried about what they would do if another people came and attacked them. How could they fight against another tribe? He worried about how they were going to catch fish. How could they hunt without a canoe, without anything? What were they going to do to live on? He tossed and turned nearly all night long. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning before he fell asleep. And so he slept in late the next day, and he was awakened by Little Hawk standing in the entrance of their house saying, "Look, look, look what I've got." And Raven Boy looked, and to his amazement, in Little Hawk's arms there was a fish, a giant halibut, so big that its head was flopping over his arms one side and its tail was flopping over the other side. And Raven Boy said, "Little Hawk, wherever did you get that from?" And Little Hawk said, "The ravens brought it to us, look." And sure enough, there were 2 ravens sitting on a stone, going, "Brock, Brock, Brock." And Raven Boy said, "Thank you. Thank you, ravens." And the ravens said, "Brock." They flew away. Well, all that day they had halibut to eat, and the next day it was wonderful. The day after that it was beginning to go over just a little bit, and they hadn't been awake for very long before 6 ravens flew over them, and these ravens were carrying between them a freshly killed hare, which they dropped on the beach. "Brock, Brock." And Raven Boy said, "Thank you ravens." And the ravens said, "Brock," and they flew away. And Little Hawk said, "There you are, you see. You fed the ravens, now they're feeding us." And it was true, they were. For the next few days, they didn't need anything. They skinned the hare, they kept the bones and the skin for making moccasins, and they enjoyed the meat. And then, just as the meat was beginning to get a bit low, a few days later, who should come along but 12 ravens. And these ravens were carrying between them a full-grown deer with antlers, which they dropped on the beach. And once again, Raven Boy said, "Thank you ravens." And the ravens said, "Brock, Brock, Brock," and flew away. And Raven Boy said, "We need to make a smokehouse. We can't eat all this meat. We need to save some of it." So they spent the day building themselves a fine smokehouse. And they skinned the deer, and they saved the antlers and the hooves and all the bones, and they smoked some of the meat, and the rest they cooked. They were very happy. And a whole week went by. And at the end of the week, they woke up one morning, and Raven Boy looked out of their hut, and he saw coming towards him what seemed to be an enormous black storm cloud. And he said, "Little Hawk, quickly, let's get all our bits and pieces and take them in. There's going to be a terrible storm." But Little Hawk had better eyes, and he said, "No." He said, "Look again." And Raven Boy shaded his eyes and looked out at the storm cloud, and to his amazement, he realised that it wasn't a storm cloud at all. It was hundreds dumped on the beach. It fell with such a resounding thud that all the cliffs shook and rang, and Raven Boy feared for his smokehouse, but he built it well and it stayed firm. He couldn't believe it. He said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, ravens." And all the ravens went, "Brock, Brock, Brock," and flew away, all except for one, which just stayed on a stone, preening itself. And Raven Boy said, "Oh, Raven, I wish you could talk." And the raven said, "I can. What is it you want me to say?" And Raven Boy said, "Oh." And then he said, "I've been worrying about the chief's youngest daughter. I've been thinking that maybe she doesn't have enough to eat where she is. If I cut off a bit of this whale meat and tied it between your shoulders, would you take it to her for me?" "Sure," said the raven. "Cut a piece off and tie it on." So Raven Boy got a knife and he hacked off a good-sized piece of whale meat and he wrapped it in leaves and he tied it onto the raven's back between its wings, and he said, "Are you sure this isn't too heavy for you?" And the raven said, "After helping to carry that whole whale, I think I can manage a little bit like this. Have you got a message for the chief's youngest daughter?" Well, Raven Boy could think of a lot of things he would have liked to have said to the chief's youngest daughter, but he was too shy. And he said, "No, just tell her it's from me. Tell her I've got a whole whale, would you?" "Sure," said the raven, and off it flew. Well, they sat on the beach and they wondered what would happen, and Little Hawk had made for himself, out of the hooves of the deer and some of the backbones of the hare, some rattles that he could tie around his knees over his trousers with sinews. And he began to sing a little song that he'd made up and dance a little dance, and it went something like, "Raven Boy, little brother, love the ravens, love each other, hey-la, ho-la. Raven Boy, little brother, love the ravens, love each other, hey-la, ho-la." It was a good song and it made Raven Boy laugh. But meantime, the raven was flying over land, and it went on flying until it came to the place where the tribe had made their new camp. They were all looking very thin and poorly. There hadn't been any fish to catch where they had gone, and the raven kept on flying until he came across the chief's youngest daughter. She was kneeling on the beach with a big basket digging for clams. It didn't look like she was finding very many. And the raven flew down in front of her and said, "Brock!" And the chief's youngest daughter saw and smelled the whale meat, and she said, "Oh, Raven, is that for me?" And the raven said, "Brock!" So with trembling fingers, the chief's youngest daughter untied it, and she was so hungry, she couldn't help just ripping off a piece with her bare teeth and golloping it down. And she said, "Oh, Raven, I wish you could talk." And the raven said, "I can. What is it you want me to say?" And she said, "Where did you get the whale meat from?" And the raven said, "From Raven Boy, with his love." I think he said with his love. Yes, I'm sure he must have done. "He's got a whole whale. Brock!" And he flew away. Well, the chief's youngest daughter, she took that whale meat in her arms as though it had been a baby. And she ran as fast as she could to her father, the chief. And when he saw it, he said, "Where did you get that from?" And she said, "From Raven Boy. He's got a whole whale." And the chief said, "Is that the way of it?" And he called all the tribe to him and he said, "Right, you lot," he said, "take your houseboards down, load them up in the canoes. We're going back to our old beach. Raven Boy has a whole whale. And you girls," he said to his daughters, and he had quite a few of them, 5 or 6. He said, "Go and put your best dresses on and do your hair nicely. We're going back to our old beach." Because the way that wily old chief's mind was working was that he was thinking if he was to offer his daughter's hands in marriage to Raven Boy might just share the whale with him. That was how he was thinking. So very soon the houseboards were down, the girls were beautifully dressed, all their hair was done nicely, and the canoes were making their way around the coastline to the old beach. And Raven Boy and Little Hawk, they were sitting on a rock watching them come. And Little Hawk said, "Raven Boy," he said, "you're not going to let those greedy ones that marooned us here and we're going to leave you to die. You're not going to share our whale with them, are you?" And Raven Boy, who had a kind heart, said, "Well," he said, "they are our people." But Little Hawk said, "We don't need them." And Raven Boy said, "If a tribe comes to make war on us, who will fight for us?" "I will fight for us," said Little Hawk. And Raven Boy said, "And if your clothes wear out, who's going to make you new ones?" "I will make me new ones." And then Raven Boy hid a smile and he said, "But if we don't let them land, who's going to listen to your stories?" And Little Hawk thought about it for a minute and he said, "Let them land. I must have people to listen to my stories." So Raven Boy lifted up his hand in a sign of peace to say that it was all right for them to land. And the chief called across the water, "Let my oldest daughters land first." But Raven Boy understood what was in his mind, and he called back, "No, let your youngest daughter land first." And so the chief's youngest daughter, she climbed out of the canoe, she waded through the water until she got to Raven Boy, and she looked at him and she smiled. And she said, "Thank you for the whale meat." And Raven Boy said, "Thank you for all the things you left me." And then he said, "I don't suppose you'd like to marry me, would you?" And the chief's youngest daughter said yes. And so it was that Raven Boy and the chief's youngest daughter were married. And I would like to tell you that they became a kinder and less mean and bullying people, but I'm afraid that wouldn't be true. But what is true is that after a few years, when the old chief died, Raven Boy became no longer just Raven Boy, but Chief Raven. And that's the story of Raven Boy and the Whale.